Hi everybody, I'm Jonathan Fields, back with another episode of Good Life Project. So my guest today is author Dani Shapiro, and she's a novelist, memoirist, and she's got a really awesome new book out called Still Writing, which really goes into not just the craft, but living your writing. It's so cool to be hanging out with you today.
Oh, it's great to be here.
We met a couple years back when your last book, Devotion, was just coming out.
That's right.
And which was a very different book. But it's fascinating to sort of have explored two of your pieces of work these days, and see how writing isn't just something you do for you. I mean, it's like it breathes you.
Yeah. No, writing for me, I say in Still Writing that it saved my life. I mean, becoming a writer really did save my life.
Take me into that.
Sure. So when I was, well, I'll take you all the way back.
Yeah.
I was raised in a religious home in New Jersey, Orthodox Jewish. Didn't grow up knowing any writers, didn't grow up knowing you could be a writer. And when I left home to go to college, it was sort of in the midst of a pretty massive rebellion. The stricter things were, the more I kind of just exploded out of them. And I went to Sarah Lawrence, and I made very quick work of just a total mess of things. I mean, just everything you can imagine, mess of things would be, I did. And when I was 23, my parents were in a very catastrophic car accident, and my father died as a result of his injuries, and my mother was very badly injured. And I mean, it was the worst moment of my life and of my family's life, and it was also this shock to my system and this kind of transformative moment that I didn't know what to do with. All I knew was that I needed to find some way for my father's death to not be utterly senseless. And I couldn't have put this into words at the time, but it was ultimately about making meaning of it, like making something of myself that I might not have become if that hadn't happened.
Yeah.
And I had always written, but I didn't know you could be a writer. I mean, I was the kid who read under the covers with a flashlight and wrote long letters to my friends that were like full of lies. I wondered if I was a pathological liar, but I did not know.
Novelist, pathological liar.
Yeah, well, it's a fine line.
You get paid for what?
And so going back to college, which I did, was taking care of my mother and sort of nursing her back to health, and going back to college and staying and going to graduate school, and I had what I thought I was ready to do, which was I thought I had a story to tell. And it was the story of all this. I wasn't ready to tell it, it turned out. But it did get me starting to write in a very serious way, to read and to write and to think about the way people tell their stories. And what I started to discover then, and what I've discovered ever since, is that I have no idea what I'm thinking unless I'm writing. I don't have access to my, what makes me tick, what my concerns are, what my passions are, what my obsessions are, my fears, my preoccupations, unless I'm crafting something on the page, and then I can look back at it and say, oh, like that's what I'm thinking about, that's what I care about. And so for me, it was like the tool that was what I chiseled myself with. Like it's how I became the person that I became, little by little by little.
Were there windows where you weren't writing and you just almost shut down, but didn't realize that part of it was because sort of like the outlet for your thinking process was just not happening? Oh
yeah, I would say between books, I feel that way with always, because I've written, Still Writing is my 8th book, and it takes me various amounts of time to write a book, but there's always this period in between.
Right.
And it's the period in which I think, I will never write again, I will never have another idea. I know that's never been true before, but this time it's really true. And that is a time when a kind of low-level inertia, depression, like it's almost as if the world has less colors in it when I'm not writing, because I'm not observing in the same way or living in my senses in that fully alive kind of almost animal way as I am when I'm in the middle of something, because when I'm in the middle of something, everything feels accessible, everything feels in some way or another like material, whether it is or isn't, it just feels like it's in Technicolor. But there's always a period, and it's often as much as a year, where it often also these days coincides with promoting a book. So I'm out talking about a book, and I'm traveling, so I'm not writing then.
Right.
And you're in hotel room after hotel room, so the feeling of being, I think writers are like cats. We want to be, we want to be in and be in our spaces.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I found something really similar, and I can't remember, there was a writer that I read a couple years back, and it was a famous male writer. And he said something like, if you want to know what I think, or I never know what I think about a thing until I see what I've written about it.
Yes.
And as soon as I saw that, I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in my head a lot, and I'm constant, but stuff really gels for me. It integrates and synthesizes. On the page. And what's so interesting to me too, I'm curious whether you experience this too, because I go back and forth between analog and computer. And I find that my thinking process and my creative output is different. It's very different based on the medium.
Absolutely. I think a lot about that, and I struggle with it. I don't like composing on a computer.
I don't either.
Ron Carlson, the writer, once said that writing on a computer is like writing in the middle of an amusement park, which so there's the piece of it, which is, there are two pieces for me. One is writing on the very instrument that you can just with one click be gone. It's so easy to just, and that's a real thing. I wrote a piece a while back. Title is #AmWriting, because on Twitter the #AmWriting.
Right, yeah.
I remember once being on Twitter and thinking, no, you're not, no, I'm not, and you're not. We're not writing right now. We're on Twitter. Let's just
writing hashtags.
Writing hashtags. And I ended up writing this piece where I traced my process consciously as I was working on a piece of fiction, and I had characters walking up a flight of stairs, and they got to a landing, and on the landing was a bureau. And I thought, I need to know more about that bureau. I think it's a Biedermeier bureau. So next thing I know, with one click, I Google Biedermeier, then I'm in an antique store in Paris, looking at Biedermeier furniture, which is very beautiful and very expensive, and that reminds me that I haven't paid my son's camp tuition. It's actually how it went. So I click over to the camp's website, and I start to take care of that, and then you have to download a picture of your kid. So I go on iPhoto. This is all very logical at the time. And suddenly I'm looking for a picture of my son, so I'm looking at pictures of my in-laws before they were infirm, and pictures of my family when it was younger, and I'm down memory lane now, and I'm feeling a little nostalgic, a little sad. And I've completely forgotten that I was with my characters walking up that staircase.
Yeah.
And so that was a real revelation, was that I'm not in control of that. I'm such a disciplined writer, but there's a section in Still Writing called Cigarette Break, where I write about, when I was really first starting out, I smoked cigarettes, and it was a long time ago, and I would, get stuck in a piece of work and take out a cigarette, tap, 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 light it. I can still feel it even now talking to you. Smoke the cigarette, stare into space, watch the smoke curl up toward the ceiling, stub it out, get back to work. It was an actual break. I wasn't doing anything else. And the realization was the internet's not a cigarette break. It's a different thing, and it's an amazing, wonderful thing, but it's not a break. So there's that. But then the other piece for me, and I wonder if you relate to this, it's like from 10 feet away or 5 feet away, depending on how poor your vision is, the page on a computer could be War and Peace, or it could be, John is a good boy, John is a good boy, John is a good boy. And so it always looks neat and tidy. You can cut and paste and move things around, and it always looks neat and tidy. Whereas the written page, there's something that is so pleasurable to me about crossing things out and making arrows and asterisks, and actually allowing it to be the messy process that it is. The trouble is, I write that way long enough, and I'm deep enough into a piece of work, I start becoming afraid that I'm going to lose it, and literally misplace it or leave it in the back of a cab or something. And then that's the point where I feel like I need to input it And once I input it, I
Right,
generally
then you're
move to
kind
the
of done.
computer.
Yeah. And it's so funny. I mean, for me, I definitely, there's something, I think that I'm a very tactile person. I'm visual and tactile. So when I still love paper books.
Yeah.
And I'm at the very fortunate position to have publishers wanting to send me books to review all the time.
Yeah.
And they're always like, you want the PDF? Do you want the online? Maybe I'm weird, but I would just send me the book. I want to hold it in my hands. I want to lie on a couch.
You might even want to write in it, or.
Yeah, and I my books are dog-eared and annotated, and actually the physical, your book itself, the physical feel, and the way it's so nice because
Thank you.
Really,
that was so important to me.
Yeah.
That it particularly, how my books look are always important to me, but with still writing, it felt like I wanted that to be a book that writers in particular would keep on their bedside table.
Yeah,
or
no
I
doubt.
wanted it to be a companion. Every time a writer comes up to me and says, actually says that, this is on my nightstand or this is on my, on my desk, that makes me so happy, and it needed to feel that way. It's just the tactile, even the decal edge, the rough edges of the.
Right, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. You can tell, when you see something like that, you can tell that somebody, either it's the author or the publisher or hopefully both, they're really thinking about the way that people are going to experience this on a different level. And I wonder, I have a Kindle because when you're traveling, there's just convenience things. But you give me a choice on any given day, I will still go back to the book. And if you give me a choice between sort of like a stock printed book and a book printed like yours, where it's almost like there's an artisan process involved, I will always take that because it changes the way you experience it. And I've had so many people say to me, that the medium is not the message. And sometimes that's true, and I think increasingly that's true because people don't care about it. But when the medium is physical, touchable, and tangible, to me, it's a part of you experience the pure information differently.
Well, and how we interact with the medium. Like if somebody comes to me with a book of mine, and this has happened mostly with my last 2 books, and it's got Post-its in the margins, and it's been dog-eared and it's been underlined, and they show me, look, I wrote this thing down, or I made an exclamation point here, and it's like this feeling of interacting with a book. And I have a Kindle and I have all that stuff, and I use them when I travel as well, but one of the things, on a Kindle, when it says X number of people also like this sentence, it stops being a private reading experience when you're noticing, oh, that's interesting. That sentence didn't really stand out for me, but this sentence over here did, and nobody dog-eared that, or nobody marked that.
Right, for a writer, it's either really good or really bad, or just yes to all.
Yeah. But it changes the very interaction. There's this beautiful letter, or I guess it was an essay by Susan Sontag that she wrote to Borges on the 10th anniversary of his death. And it was basically saying, I can't quote it, but it was saying, this is what things are turning into. We read on these devices. We are interacting with texts, rather than reading books. And it was just this, it was sort of like a writer's cry, in a way of saying, and it is changing. And my son just today got the brand new iPad, and that kid is over the moon excited, and it's the way that he reads. He would take that over a physical book, and his whole generation would take that over a physical book. He looks around our library at home, which has thousands of books in it, and he says, "But you've read all these. Why do you still have them?" It's like the idea of just wanting to be surrounded by what you've read.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was walking down the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and there's still this one little, on Broadway and 80th Street or something. There's this one tiny little bookstore wedged between 2 buildings with, and it's got 15-foot ceilings, even though it's tiny now, and the books are stacked up all over, and it's got the old, wood, and you just step in it, and your heart rate lowers.
Yeah,
There's something about it. My daughter's 12, and she's an obsessive reader, and she prefers printed books.
That's great.
So I'm like, let's see if we can keep that for a long time. I want to take you back because, and if you're cool with it, and kind of explore a little bit. When your dad passed and your mom was injured, you grew up in a very, like you said, a very strict Orthodox home where certain things just were expected and certain things weren't expected. and with writers and people who sort of embark upon writing and this deep inner exploration that they share through that writing, I'm curious how sort of like that moment in time affected or potentially empowered you to choose a particular path, or not so much.
You mean the moment in time of making a decision to?
Yeah, I mean, to sort of like know that you came from this history and a very orthodox upbringing, which has certain expectations of how, especially how women play certain roles in the world. And it seems like you had already really rebelled from that and stepped away from it. But was there something that was still sort of like with your dad, especially, still there, being a patriarch in this very deep tradition?
Oh yeah.
Controlling your choice of future, that changed in any way?
Well, a few things. One is, my background is interesting in that my father was Orthodox, my mother wasn't. And so their argument over all that was very formative for me as a child. They fought over me and how to raise me. And so there was a couple of things. One is the sense that religion and maybe even spiritual life was just a source of conflict. So, which is why I kind of fled all of it and didn't really revisit it until I was a mother and started really feeling like I have to figure this out. But my dad, who I was very, very close to, I think has informed my whole adult life. You know, we lose people and then they continue. We continue to have relationships with them. He's been gone half my life, more than half my life now, and I have made a lot of choices. Not anymore so much, but he really kind of. I internalized him and he became my compass in certain ways. Not in terms of what he'd want me to do, because that wasn't going to happen, but in terms of maybe moving in a direction of what might make him proud. And I mean, the culmination of this was actually last year. My son was 13, and I live with my family in a part of Connecticut that's very not Jewish and not, there was no organized place that I could find if I wanted to have him bar mitzvahed. And what ended up happening, because when devotion came out, is I became friends with tons of female rabbis. Now, in Orthodoxy, there are no female rabbis.
Right.
Women would never approach the Torah. The whole thing is verboten. And here I go and I write this book that has me suddenly, and unintentionally, so much was accidental about this, but being the speaker in front of 150, the 150 Reformed female rabbis, it's like there was such pleasure in that, but not a rebellious pleasure, more of a, this is what this has evolved to. And so when my son Jacob was being bar mitzvahed, it took place in a church, on a green, a village green in New England. Two friends who were women rabbis, who were a couple, officiated. There were readings from Coleridge, and there were readings from Hannah Senesh, and there was the Torah reading, and there was music, and my son played the ukulele, and I played the piano, and everyone sang Broken Hallelujah, the entire 150 people who were there. And I had people coming up to me after that ceremony with tears in their eyes, saying, I never knew it could be like this. And I could start crying talking about it, because every single thing about that day was built from the ground up. It was built, I realized I hadn't been handed a spiritual life. I had been handed a religion, and I had been handed a heritage that I was proud of, but it didn't work in terms of relevance in my life and in what I wanted to pass on to my kid. I didn't know it was okay to build a spiritual life. And it was the physical, ceremonial embodiment of building it and seeing how that evolved. It was like writing it, It was, we wrote our own prayer book. I mean, the whole thing, everything about it was, and the feeling I had was that my father was there, and that he, in his own way, was really proud. And in that, my son wore his tallis, his ceremonial shawl. It was closed with some silver clips that were my grandfather's. These were not men that would ever have walked into a church, would ever have been able to condone a woman reading from the Torah or music at a service like this on the Sabbath. But yet that didn't matter, because religion, spiritual life is an evolution. And it was like I wasn't opting out of it. I was kind of turning the page on it and saying, now
it's
this.
like you were owning and defining it the way that you needed to for it to be meaningful.
Right. As opposed to just simply walking away from it.
Yeah.
Which had stopped feeling okay to me. To not give him anything. To not give my son a sense of a mantle being passed, whatever he does with it, but just the feeling of, you come from this, and there's a lot that's beautiful, and there's a lot that I'm very proud of about this heritage, and we're not living in that way. I mean, my cousins live in Israel. When people in my family die, they're buried in Jerusalem. It's a very different way than the way that we live in,
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting the way people explore religion and spirituality. As you sort of get to a point where you can start to choose more deliberately.
And it's so empowering.
And then when you become a parent also, then you need to choose, how am I going to hand this down, in what way, and will I?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was brought up very non-religious. But I'm a pretty deeply spiritual person. But it's sort of like a conversation in the house now. Like, where are we going from here? Because my daughter's becoming of an age where she kind of is exploring. Yeah. And there are questions where faith will give certain answers. They may not be the answers you agree with, but do you expose somebody to the answers of a particular faith? Right. And let them be guided by, or do you expose them to a variety and let them find their way to what they're most drawn to? Those were some of my most governing questions, especially when I started devotion. Right, devotion. Because there was that feeling of, I think I had secretly always felt that it was lazy or not intellectually rigorous to say, well, you can take a little bit of Buddhism, a little bit of Judaism, this monk over here is really interesting, and but what I came to over those years, every really deep spiritual thinker that I ended up having the honor of getting to know, all took their wisdom from a multiple of sources. They all, because they were so secure in their own kind of sense of things that my friend Sylvia Borstein, who she began as a teacher of mine. She's an amazing Buddhist teacher, and she's also Jewish, and she sees no contradiction. She tells the story where someone said to her, "Why are you confusing your Buddhism with your Judaism? Buddhism, it's so pure, it's so clear, it's so simple. Why would you complicate it with your Judaism?" And she said, "Because I am complicated with it. It's where I come from. Right. I have too much background in it to not be." And it was just such a simple thing. Fine, this and that, not this or that. Right. Yeah, it is, and it's so interesting how people move through that. But I want to zoom the lens back into writing. And the writers, because we have a limited, you and I could probably go off on a lot of tangents for a long time. Developing a life as a writer, I think, is a really interesting thing today. Because on the one hand, the world of writing is changing profoundly. The world of publishing, which is different than just writing, is changing in a very profound way. And on the one hand, depending on where you are, becoming very limited and very painful. On the other hand, also opening up just incredible opportunity and possibility. You've been writing for a while now. I'm curious how you've sort of experienced personally the evolution of the industry, over the last 5-10 years. It's really, it's moving so fast and changing so much, and I right now feel very excited about it, because I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago. I think 5 years ago I was confused about it. I remember sitting next to the CEO of one of the biggest publishers at a dinner party and asking him, what he thought about digital publishing, and he kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, I don't know. And I was like, oh my God. It's a nuisance. If you don't know, I don't know. Who knows? And but the landscape has changed so radically that, with still writing, the things that are most exciting for this book, with the exception of, Oprah or something like that, have happened online. Where that's interesting. This, Maria Popova from Brain Pickings. Yeah. Oh my God, I feel like she's my fairy god sister or something. She's written about still writing twice now in these remarkable ways that then get tweeted all over the place and put on and passed from hand to hand to hand to hand. And
my last short story, I published in electric literature instead of publishing in one of the good literary journals. Why? Because when electric literature publishes something, it gets so many more people's attention, so many more readers than a small journal that is a wonderful thing and a prestigious thing and fabulous, but it's a far smaller readership. At the same time, it's noisier and noisier and noisier, and faster and faster and faster. And I personally have never worked so hard in my life. There is, if I were to think back 10, 12 years to a book tour, boy, was that model broken. But it was the model that everybody did.
Right. You kind of knew what the prescribed steps were.
And if you were lucky enough to have your publisher send you on a book tour, you would go to these cities and you might read to a crowd would be 35 people in Minneapolis or 40 people in Seattle. That would be considered a success. And then out of those people you would sell 10 books, 12 books, and your publisher would have spent $1,000 to have you in that city. And when I've talked about this with friends who are in other businesses,
right.
They're like, what?
Where's the model in that?
And so that model was just irreparably broken, except it was what everybody did. And now there's so much more. The nature abhors a vacuum, right? So all of these other ways of promoting books have sprung up. And I would say, to be completely honest, I have a huge book tour going on right now. Most of it is stuff that I have figured out for myself. My publisher's sending me, but I've kind of made it happen, and that's empowering. That's actually not. I think there was a time when writers were sitting back, scratching our heads, thinking, "Wait a minute, it's not supposed to be like that. Mommy's supposed to come along and fix this," and this kind of infantilization of just thinking, well, my agent or my editor or my publisher is going to do this for me, and that's not the model anymore. And so I think it's creating. Writers need to be entrepreneurial, and that's also very complicated. I happen to be good at it, and I also enjoy it. So I'm kind of just rising to the occasion and doing it. For someone who's super shy, and I'm actually shy, I just learned how to not be, but for somebody who's really has a hard time being in public, speaking. I just finished teaching at a retreat. For a writer to get up and read their own work in front of you, it's terrifying. So I just think all of that is really, it's changing. I think a lot of writers who would never have considered publishing with a small press are choosing to, so that they have more control. Writers are choosing to self-publish. There's so much that's shifting and changing just in terms of what the models are.
Yeah, and it's amazing.
And that's exciting.
And it's happening so quickly. I'm drawn really similarly to you also in that I actually I'm an entrepreneur also. So, I write, but I also like to build things. And I like, the risk, and I'm willing to go out there. I'm also an introvert, but in the moments where I can go out there and talk about something I care deeply about to people who care deeply about it also, I love doing it. I just need to retreat as soon as I'm done, and go be alone for a little bit. And I've had this conversation so many times because, people are like, well, what about the craft? Why can't I just sit in a room and become extraordinary at what I'm doing? And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not going anywhere. You still have to do that. You still...
it's not this or that.
The ticket in there is still, you've got to do your best work. And you've got to spend years developing the craft, But you have an opportunity now to choose. You can choose to allocate a certain amount of your additional energy to becoming an enterprise, and then in doing so, start to reclaim a lot of control that writers haven't had for a long time before that, or you can choose not to, and then, but in doing so, you're basically also choosing to hand over whatever it is that you create and pray.
Well, and that's where, I think that what I find I'm really kind of honing into and really thinking about here is that the danger, I think, is in a self-consciousness, right? It's like in losing oneself in the, well, people tell me that this is, I don't even want to use this word, but like this is my brand or this is my platform or whatever. And my thinking right now is actually about moving closer and closer and closer to this utterly idiosyncratic, contradictory, I'm a literary novelist, I wrote the spiritual memoir, now I've written this book about writing. I taught academically, now I'm teaching at yoga and meditation retreats around the country. I sit down with my students and I make them meditate now. And it's all evolved not from the outside in, but from the inside out. And so that, I never sat down, and said, this is my game plan. It's more like, okay, now here I am, how do I recognize what's happened and take it and bring it out into the world in a way that that it can touch the most possible people. And then the really challenging thing, I think, is what you're talking about. It's then completely retreat.
Yeah.
Like when I was writing devotion, I didn't get my hair cut. I didn't go to the dentist.
It's like the classic writer in the cave.
I was, I was really in the cave, and I stayed in the cave until I was done. And you know what? The thing that I think is hard for most of us is it's not that hard to come out of the cave. You come out, you blink a little bit, it's really bright out there, and then it's like, oh, it's kind of fun, it's a party out here.
Right.
The hard part is to really, at a certain point, say, I'm done for now, and I'm going to go back in, and I'm going to stay in and do this next piece of work and really, because for me, the danger is in distractibility. Right, it's like I can't, on any given day, blog a little, tweet a little, have a, sort of public kind of event or something like that and have that be a writing day.
I so agree. And I've experimented so much with my schedule. And, can I just build chunks of time into my day if I'm working on a book or something more substantial? And it's almost impossible for me to do it. I have to dedicate, here's a day.
Yeah.
Or 3 days a week or a week, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that I know, that's my job for that day. It's one thing and one thing only. Because as soon as I go down, the shiny object road, I don't come back.
That's right. It's
and I've tried,
easy.
I've put freedom apps on my computer. I've done all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, I need to shut my computer down to actually disable this and restart it. Completely lame if I do that. And then a couple hours later, I'm closing up my computer.
Yeah.
So it's, I completely agree. And I structure my day really similarly because I just know that about myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why retreats are kind of are multiplying and burgeoning right now for writers, because there is that, and not just for writers. Yoga retreats, meditation retreats, going on retreat. The idea of retreat as a noun, just in our culture more and more and more, because there's this speed, there's just this mental speed, and then there's this need for a kind of quiet rejuvenation, and when I'm in that speeding mode, I have absolutely, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, I have no idea what I'm thinking. None. It's like I'm disconnected. I'm disconnected from my body. I'm disconnected from my heart. I'm just kind of going, going. Which is a lot of people live their whole lives that way. But if you're trying to create something, you can't do that.
Yeah. No. At some point, everything has to settle.
Yeah. I think of it as a snow globe.
I know. It's so interesting that you said retreats have become a big thing now. But what's interesting is for, I think, creative professionals, especially writers, your average person outside of that world goes on retreat to get away from work.
Right.
Whereas for us, we go there to do the work.
Right.
Which is it's sort of just an interesting swap.
do you know how to take just a vacation?
No. I've thought about this and I've talked about this. What I do is just an organic extension of my essence.
Right.
So the notion of going on retreat and leaving or going on vacation
Right.
and abandoning who I
Right.
am to go on vacation just
Right.
doesn't make any
Right.
sense to me.
Right.
I'm going to write, I'm going to think, I'm going to create, I'm going to draw.
Right.
Because that's what I do. That's
Right.
how I breathe. That's how I think.
Right. And to not do that would be work.
Right. Exactly. You know. So while other people are like, well, you can watch TV, you can watch sports, you can go do these activities.
Right.
Awesome. We'll all go together as a group. You do that.
Right.
And I'm going to grab a moleskin and hang out at a cafe with
Right.
a cup of coffee.
Right.
And I'm going to be really okay with that because
Right.
I don't feel like I'm not laboring.
Right. No,
You know,
exactly.
and it's so I think it's fascinating. You brought up meditation. That in your retreat you talked about meditation. You've written a bit about this also. I meditate every single day. I started out, and it has a profound effect on every part of my life, including my creative process. Talk to me more about this.
Meditation now for me, along with my yoga practice, which I've had for 20 years, is such an integral part of my writing life, of my life, that I now, you know, I can't, it's all inextricably linked. I don't have I get up in the morning and I meditate practice. It's much more it's one of the reasons why my office is at home, so that I can unroll my mat in the middle of the day
Right, yeah.
and sit. And it started for me really, I mean, I always tried to meditate, and I felt like I, you know, must be a bad meditator, or I would be a bad meditator, like too type A to meditate, and, you know, my mind too active to meditate. And I really didn't understand that was precisely
Right.
the point. The whole kind of like, oh, whoa, look where my mind is going. Oh, okay, it's going. I mean, that's like, come on back, mind. It's okay. But it wasn't until at Kripalu, actually, I met Sylvia Borstein, and she was leading a loving kindness, a metta meditation retreat, and there was something about these phrases. There was something about concentrating the mind on. I mean, Sylvia's phrases have changed over the years, but may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be strong, may I live with ease. May you be safe, may you be happy, and the offering of these phrases, and also for the first time to connect it back to my background and my childhood, I instantly had this feeling of like, well, wait a minute, who am I asking for this? Am I asking God? Do I believe in God? And I started going completely into this, you know, spiral of, wait a minute, is this prayer? And Sylvia said, it doesn't have to be metaphysical at all. It's just the expression of a wish. And that was a real aha moment for me, because the feeling of like, well, what's a prayer other than an expression of a wish in a way? And it all connected for me for the first time. And so that practice is a way of really stilling my mind, and connecting me at the same time with all of humanity. And it's also a very portable practice, as is all meditation. Yeah. But I will be walking through an airport, and if I can remind myself, I will see this stream of people walking towards me, and we're all so, you know, anxious in airports and feel so sort of discombobulated and disembodied. And I will think, oh, man with the suitcase, may you be safe. You know, oh, lady with the stroller, may you be happy. And instantly, my inner life shifts into being connected rather than being isolated and separate.
Yeah, it is so powerful.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that on so many different levels. Also, my daily practice is mindfulness, and I just know. And when I was sort of like first playing with it, years before I actually developed the real practice, I went to a Buddhist weekend sort of training, and they ran it by you would sit and observe your breath for about 20 minutes, and then you'd get up and you'd walk slowly.
Yeah.
And then you would sit for 30 minutes and you'd walk for longer. And I was amazed at the fact that, you know, like it counted when you were walking.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but I knew as a kid, I was a gymnast, I mountain bike in the woods, that I had found that place through movement my whole life.
Yeah.
But I always just assumed that wasn't the real thing.
Right. And that's so important.
Yeah.
I mean, that, for me, yoga is a meditation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are often times where I can't just sit. I need to unroll my mat. I have an hour-long yoga practice. I developed it when we moved to Connecticut because I couldn't find a studio near enough to my home to continue to go to classes. So I developed a solitary, a self practice, and in doing that, so if I've, it's the only thing that I know that allows me to restart my day as a writer, so that if I don't start the day off well, if I often say like the longest walk of my day is from the cappuccino maker in my kitchen to my desk. If I actually make it all the way from the cappuccino machine to my desk without getting distracted, and I sit down and I then don't start doing other things on the internet, then I'm going to have a good day. But so often I'll get in my own way, or I'll start checking email right away, because surely there's something really important I have to attend to, or I'll get into the detritus of life, and then by 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, my brain feels like it's fried.
Nah.
The only thing that can unfry my brain is unrolling my mat. If I can do that, I will be able to sit down again. But otherwise, I've gotten in my own way, and I'm all stuck in my head.
Yeah.
And so it's such a great tool, and it's why I love to teach it now, because, and I remember thinking, I was on the phone with Sylvia Boorstein, and I was about to lead a retreat at Kripalu, and I said, it's a writing retreat. So I'm thinking about having them meditate a little bit. And Sylvia, 75 years old, eminent Buddhist, she said, have them meditate a lot. And it just gave me permission. I mean, I write a lot about permission in still writing, but permission to say I'm gonna lead these meditations, or I'm gonna have people get up and stretch in the middle of a writing class. We're not all just these disembodied, floating heads.
I think it's one of the big myths about writers also, is that you're just in your head, and there is such a visceral connection between your soul and spirit and all that, but just physical body movement changes everything.
And being grounded, feeling that sense of where are you in your body? It's where our work comes from. As at least as much as the rest of us.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I know it's changed everything that I do, but my creative process in a pretty profound way too. So the name of this project is the Good Life Project. So when I offer that term out to you, to live a good life, what comes up?
I think to me, to live a good life is to live an authentic life, to live a life, for me, in which there's no aspect of my life in which I can't be true to myself, true to what matters to me, true to my values, true to, can I tell you a quick story in relation to this? So, when I had been invited to go on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, I was nervous. I thought, I'm just going to be up in my head. I don't want to be up in my head. This is an awesome opportunity. I want to be actually present for this. And so all of my preparation for it had nothing to do with getting media training or anything like that. I didn't do any of that. It was about, how can I be fully centered in this place? How can I be curious, not self-conscious, just be completely in a conversation? And I did that. And at the end of that hour, from the car on the way to the airport, I called my husband and I said, every word I said was true. And I think that's living a good life. That feeling of every word I say is true. Sometimes at the end of my yoga practice, I'll, in Namaste, what is it? I just lost it. I've said it 10,000 times in my life. Asking for clarity of thought, clarity of speech, and clarity of action.
That's beautiful. Love the conversation.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's great.
So my guest today has been Dani Shapiro, author of 8 books, the latest, a fantastic book called Still Writing. I'm Jonathan Fields, signing off for Good Life Project.